History has been written to sort of almost cut women out, and now there's an attempt to redress, and I do think that it's a moment that we can all celebrate. I happen to believe truly, and I'm sure you do, Susanna, that when women have parity, and it's about parity, it's about justice, there is a much healthier society all around. And for our boys, for our girls growing up in the next generation, it's really important for them to know that we're all the same.
You have just secured the first interview with David Cameron, first broadcast interview since he left office, and you carried that out, in which he said he had no regrets about calling a referendum, but he did regret the result of the referendum. Why do you think he gave the interview?
I have actually interviewed him quite a lot throughout his career, including the very first interview we did at CNN, which wasn't broadcast when he became leader of the party. And we did it for a select audience. It was something that CNN did without being broadcast. And on his major sort of foreign adventures, I've been there. CNN has been there, and this was he wanted to launch his fragile state report that he had been conducting with academics and people from the London School of Economics.
Do you think that he's telling the truth? Do
About
you
what?
think that he actually doesn't regret calling the referendum?
I don't
or do you
know.
Think he does?
I would very much like to dig much deeper, but you know what they say, that the Tory party was in a civil war with itself. I don't know whether it's out of that civil war yet, but that this had to happen. I mean, look,
well, it's still actually in that civil war, definitely,
it still
between the
hasn't solved that issue.
Eurosceptics
You're absolutely
and
right.
the Europeans.
But, all I can tell you is that from an international perspective, and I cover international news, most of the world leaders who I speak to essentially say, they can't believe it. They say, look, this is what do they say, the biggest and unnecessary act of self-harm in the modern era. We'll see how it works out. The truth is, it hasn't happened yet, so we don't actually know. So he said, well, it's a mistake, but not a catastrophe. We don't know how it's going to work out.
We just had this crisis in Syria. It's an ongoing crisis, been going 7 years, the Syrian war. And we had this apparent chemical weapons attack by Assad's forces, as that's the belief. We then had the retaliatory airstrikes, and we've all sort of moved on with our lives very quickly. Well, what did you make of that?
We have seen these chlorine barrel bombs being dropped since the war practically began. We've seen the effects of it, the foaming at the mouth, the inability to get oxygen, the bodies basically dropping like flies. And this is the same kind of result and evidence that we've had from people on the ground that we had in the previous
Here
one.
is my but I would put in here, is that we know that Assad did this a year ago. We know Donald Trump retaliated then with a strike on an airfield. And it clearly didn't deter Assad or his sidekick Putin, who's now taken sides with Assad. There was no deterrent then from that action. Why should there be any deterrent from this very limited airstrike?
You're right. You're right. The fact of the matter is that the West has no strategy. And in the absence of a strategy, those who do have a strategy, Assad, Iran, Russia, and previously the Islamic jihadist terrorists, they are the ones in the driving seat. The world's refusal to tolerate the normalization of chemical weapons use and the use of weapons of mass destruction, which Assad was getting away with.
Is it inevitable now that Assad and Putin win this war? And is it imperative it now comes to an end as soon as possible?
You know, it looks like facts on the ground show that Assad is winning, but he can only win as long as Putin and Iran stay there to prop him up. It's not a sustainable situation, because you need politics, you need a peace agreement, you need diplomacy, you need negotiations. That's where the world has to step in. And
what is happening with North and South Korea? Because for a moment that felt very dangerous, very vulnerable, and all of a sudden it feels like there could be a breakthrough.
When President Obama handed over to President Trump, he told him that your biggest challenge is going to be North Korea's nuclear program. In the same way, President George W. Bush told President Obama that Iran and its nuclear program is going to be your biggest challenge. So Obama dealt with Iran and got this nuclear deal. Now Trump is having to deal with North and South Korea. South Korea has taken the diplomatic route, and it seems to be paying dividends. We do not know where this is going to go. We don't know the price Kim Jong-un of North Korea is going to try to exact. But we do know, and particularly, you know, the West has been in a state of not knowing whether there's going to be some kind of unthinkable. There has to be an negotiation. You know, in America, they're very, very weird about it. Many of the right wing thinks that negotiation is for sissies and negotiation means we have to win everything. But of course, that's not the case. There has to be a win-win situation. But if Trump manages, like Obama did with Iran, to neutralize the immediate danger, it'll be a big legacy issue. There's no doubt about it. And what he's done is allowed, despite Trump's very bellicose tweets and rhetoric, he has allowed the South Koreans to pursue diplomacy.
If I could relive for you one moment of your extraordinary career, again, something that you did, an interview that you did, what would you choose?
I don't know, for television purposes, maybe the time Yasser Arafat hung up on me on Primetime Live, or maybe the time I challenged President Clinton over Bosnia, and he shouted at me and told me there'd be no flip-flops, madam. And, you know, every time I went to do an interview after that, all the world leaders called me madam. That lasted for about 10 years. But I don't know, you know, the first Gulf War was amazing, covering Bosnia was amazing. I have no regrets.
Well, my answer would be my interview with President Trump, because I know that you haven't had one yet.
Well, yes, and I want you to get me the next interview. So there you go, Piers, you brought it up. Thanks a lot.
It's the only
He's
thing.
going to be my producer.
It's the only thing I've got against Christiane Amanpour. I got to him before you did. So, yeah, it's my only claim to fame.
You have a bigger claim.